Did anybody pray last week the prayer, God, search me? God, search me. Yeah. It is scary. This series called Dangerous Prayers is very bold because it picks at me as a believer and says, maybe some of my prayers are very, very safe. God bless me. God protect us. God keep this thing from happening that's painful. God, don't allow that thing to come in here, God, that's a problem. But a dangerous prayer is a prayer that kind of invites a problem. But it invites the right problem. Because I'm going to have problems either way, right? I got problems, you got problems, all God's children got problems. I'm going to have one kind of problem or the other kind of problem. And so it's time for me to be willing to invite the problem that's dangerous to the me I don't want to be. And it's okay to be dangerous toward the person that's making me miserable. And today's prayer is probably the most dangerous of them all. Last week was search me. God, search me. Next week might be like your biggest anchor message. Maybe today is your biggest anchor message. A message where you look back in your life and you say, that was the moment. This is the time. That's the moment. Like that message, I remember that message. That I knew where I was. I knew what was going on when I heard that message. I've never heard anything like that. And so maybe this will be your week. Maybe next week. Next week's message is send me. God, here's the blank check, God. Whatever you ask me to do in the future, my answer is already yes, God. And it's okay to look at my life and say, I've gotten safe. I've gotten comfortable. God, send me. And this is really against that version of Christianity that says God exists to make you feel good. God exists to make you just overwhelmingly gaining things comfortable. And this potential in this prayer today is amazing. The prayer, break me. Anybody here ever broke something? You ever broke something? I mean, I'd want to see who's broke something that was really expensive. Like, see, what is the most expensive thing you've ever broken? Somebody. You broke the whole air conditioner. You blew it up. But how expensive would that have been? $4,000. Okay. Anybody else broke something? Yes, sir. A whole program. Did Total Systems go down? Okay. Fees. About how expensive would that have been? $17 million. And like you're still employed and everything. It tells you how valuable you are. Man. You know, there's this story in my family that I always tell the kids. I call it the Philip Harvey principle. Now, Philip, if you ever hear this message, Philip, by way of video, it's about you. There's a guy who lived down the street from us, and there was, in our neighborhood, you go back behind the neighborhood, and there was a train track there. A train track back there. And Philip was back there. We used to all go back there in the woods. There's houses around there now. Bull Creek kind of goes back through there. And we would put, like a quarter on the train track. Anybody ever did that? A dime on the train track. Then we started getting experimental, putting other things on the train track. Anybody ever put something on the train track? Something wild, something crazy? What'd you put on the train track, Jed? A penny, okay. It makes it awesome. It's amazing. It's cool. Well, there was a place on the train tracks everybody knew about that it was just kind of weird where there was like a little gap about this much. And Philip and some of his friends were back there and he pulled up a big stake because, the stakes were kind of movable too. It was they would kind of wiggle out from time to time. And he put a stake in that spot. We thought this would be amazing. If a penny makes it like this, what's that train track going to do? What's the train going to do to the whole stake? What's it going to do? And all I knew is I was out coming back from Philip's house. When they have this very special group of law enforcement officers that work for the railroad. I mean, I didn't know. I mean, and they literally, it was like they really did drive the government black SUVs. And I'm riding my bike up the hill, and the government SUV swarms around. They get out and they say, "Do you know a boy named Philip?" And I go, And we find out that stake on the rails jumped up when it was hit. It broke the brake line and derailed the whole train. And one friend said the last thing I saw with Philip is he was crying and the train cops were at his house. The train cops were at his house and his parents had to pay. His parents had to pay because of what it cost. Sometimes when you break things, it's just bad. There's nothing good that comes out of it, right? Sometimes you break things and you think, well, why? Like, what's even the reason for that? I mean, there's no good that can come out of it. But other times when things are broken, what's inside of them finally gets to come out. Like an expensive vase that has something more valuable inside. You know, when I was first called into ministry, I remember people saying things. I would tell them, like, I'm called to be a pastor. I'm like so excited. Like I feel like I got picked, you know. And I remember people in my church, sometimes people would say, "Oh no." Other people would say, "Ooh, well, that's not me." I thought, like, I got picked. What are you talking about? I mean, I was the kid at the very end of the kickball line, you know, that got picked last. They're like, God picked me. I remember people saying, like, if anything you got to do, you know, you run from it, and if God really wants you, he'll come and bring you back. And I thought, that doesn't sound like the Bible. That sounds like the opposite of that. I had one pastor tell me one time, if you can do anything else, do that. But if you can't do anything else, then it's probably true. And what we realize is there's a lot of danger out there in the world. I remember along that time was a time period where, you know, this televangelist was the first one, you know, they got caught doing this, and this other mega preacher was caught doing that. And this other mega preacher was caught doing this, and I thought, oh no. If those guys do that, what's the hope for people like me? And then a man came to our church. Bill's laughing because he was there then. His name was David Ring. Yeah. David Ring was born with a cerebral palsy handicapped. He's told he would never really have a normal life. He was told he could probably never get married, certainly would never have children, never drive a car. And then as he came to our church and that year, you know, I saw him several different times because wherever he was, I would go try to listen. Because when he preached, you could not help but pay attention because his voice sounded like the most difficult to understand cerebral palsy accent that you could ever have. I mean, you listen and you think, I can't listen to this. Then you listen to more and say, maybe I can understand a few words. And it's like listening to somebody with an accent, and eventually you think, I think I'm getting it. And he would say, I've got cerebral palsy. What's your problem? And it broke me into a million pieces, and I realized that the only way I would be safe serving God is if I would be broken. Even though my body wasn't broken like that, I had to be willing to accept whatever brokenness came into my life. The only way to be actually safe in doing dangerous things. Like, don't you know that sometimes you sense that God wants you to do something that's very dangerous? It's risky. It's like, I've got to get rid of this relationship. Like, and then the whole issue of like sacrificing things in life. The only way to be safe is if I'm broken, because I can't do it being full of me. I can't do it. I can't do it being full of the things. I can't do it as a person who is solid. I've got to do it as a person who doesn't have it together, who can't succeed, but knowing that there's somebody's going to work through me, and I've got to be broken in order for God to get out, to work through me, to come out of my life. I can't ever be a person who believes that I've got it together. It's got to be that I know somebody who does. And if you and I ever believe that we can do it without being broken by him, we're headed for that kind of derailment, like where the train comes off the tracks. In the Bible, in Mark 14, there's these two passages that are right next to each other. It's like a 2-for-1 Bible lesson right there. If you see them right there next to each one another. In Mark chapter 14, there's a story of a woman, and she's a prostitute. And nobody wanted to be her. Her life was filled with shame. It wasn't like a little girl growing up saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a prostitute. It was never that, and only if she was in such a dire situation financially, or maybe some abuse background or something in her life where there was no other thing that she could do. There was no other moment where somebody would want her. She was hated by every woman and used by many men. But one day, she met a different kind of man. A man that she had never met a man like this before. A man who would love her and never want to use her or abuse her. I mean, to look at that type of man the very first time, I've never seen this before. What is this? Who is this man? And it broke her when she heard of God's love through the person of Jesus Christ. And her extravagant love confused everybody, honestly. You ever met somebody that their extravagant love for Jesus just confused people? Like, you don't have to do all that. She was that kind of person. And in Mark 14, verse 3, it says, while Jesus was in Bethany, reclining at the table at the home of Simon the leper, a woman came in with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. Like nard, not lard, okay? All right? When I read this, I always read this, I think, pure nard. I think, okay, nard. Well, I'm not exactly sure what nard is either. Pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on Jesus' head. Now, this is what blew me away. And he let her. He let her. You ever wonder if your gift is the right gift? You ever wonder if what you have to offer is the right thing? He let her. And so get the story. There's a rabbi named Jesus. A leper is at the home of Simon the leper. Been healed, been loved, been taken care of by Jesus, and people are gathered around Simon the leper. And then a prostitute. It sounds like a joke, doesn't it? A rabbi, a leper, and a prostitute, walk into a bar. It sounds like something like that. And Simon wants healing. A prostitute, she brings in this perfume, and the Bible says the aroma filled the entire house. It was unmistakable that somebody had done something dangerous, strange, and weird. This wasn't normal worship. Hey, this wasn't a normal day at church. And so as they broke it, you just think about like the people, and the response was so predictable. They broke it, she was breaking it, putting them in, and it's like people were going, no! Somebody screamed from the back, "Stop! It's so expensive. You broke something so expensive." Because this was known to be the value of a full year's wage. Just imagine how much you make in a year. Average that out. Say maybe yours is higher, maybe yours is a little bit lower. And so say maybe average $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in what we call money today. Wow. That's like a college fund. I get a really good school. That's pays all of my bills off and all my children's bills off, and that pays everything off. Everything. People are saying, "No, we should have kept it and sold it." And the very practical people saying, "We should have given money to the poor." Give money to the poor. I mean, if you ever managed any ministry dollars, you know how extremely just like nitty gritty the dollars are. You're like, "I don't know if we're going to get any more. Who's going to give? I don't know if anybody will. Will we ever get any ever again?" And there they are. They say, "We should have sold it. That could have fed a lot of people, helped a lot of people." And I've heard, teachers and preachers, kind of make fun of this or kind of insult this and say it was their lack of faith. It was their lack of faith. But I would have done the same thing. Stop! So now get this, she broke it and she poured it. Just remember this in this message today. Broken and poured. The reason for the breaking is the pouring. The reason for the breaking is the pouring. It's the most extravagant gift. It was a gift that said something about her past. Because this perfume was the sign of a prostitute. I mean, they didn't have they couldn't print up a card. There was no, scandalous magazine to advertise on. There was no hidden website. Nobody was swiping right or swiping left. How would they know anything about anything like that? And that smell, she walks down the street and it was the smell of availability. Something about her past. Somebody would smell that and go, You know how the power of smell is to you? How even smart in their sin it was to use the power of smell. And without that, she had no possibility of income ever again from that. And to be able to afford all that, she was probably a pretty good prostitute. We afford that, and something about her past, what was she doing? She was burning the bridges. I'm broken, and I'm poured. And it says also something about her future. Because she said, I can't be this anymore. After I have seen what I have seen, after I've understood what I've understood, and after I've met somebody who is God, after I've felt the kind of love I've craved all my life, I've stayed awake at night crying, begging, hoping that there could ever be in this world a real love. And this is not even like some man that she's going to meet that's going to take care of her. This is, oh my gosh, this exists. What I had secretly believed might exist does exist. This is what I want in my future. I want this in my future. Jesus, you've loved me so. You've loved me so much. Jesus, break me, because the reason that I have to break this is because you already broke me. The broken perfume was a sign of a person who was willing to pray and say, "Break me." And it's interesting that she was broken not by judgment, but by grace. She couldn't go back. She couldn't go back. We mistakenly think many times that people family members, friends, people in church. What they need is, they need to really, really, really see how bad what they've done is. People know what they've done most of the time. What causes somebody to say, I want Jesus, is that they believe in their heart if they come to God, there'll be grace. Because otherwise, they just stay on the outside of it. That's the first story. Let's look at the second story in Mark. This is the story of the Last Supper. It's recorded in all the Gospels. It's the story of the Last Supper. There's Jesus. He says, I desire to eat this Passover meal with you once more before I suffer. Now with Jesus, there's never just one meaning in something he does. He's not saying, hey, I'm hungry. Let's hang out and eat. He's not just saying, like, hey, there's a Passover meal. We need to do the ritual, so that we can kind of have our fuzzy, nice memories. And that's good because they all had amazing memories of Passover. It was their Christmas, basically, or their Easter, basically, where they gathered around and they were with family. They were with the closest, deepest friends, and they could experience and know that God is real and think about how the Passover angel passed over the Jews in Egypt, and that broke the back of Pharaoh's tyranny, and they were set free, and their ancestors came out of slavery. How powerful, but it was even more than that for Jesus. It wasn't just friends and family. It wasn't just remembering the power of the ritual. It was for him. He wanted them to learn something. He's thinking like, through this, you're going to get it. And say this with me. Say, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it. That Jesus wants us to get it today, just like he wanted them to get it in that moment. And so as they were eating in verse 22, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. Then he broke it into pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, take it, for it is my body. And he took a cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. And he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. Now we have the little cups, which is fine, but they passed around one goblet. They didn't have plastic little cups. They didn't have the Christian store that you get the stuff for the communion from. They didn't have an account. They had one cup, and so they passed it around. And he said, "This is my blood, which confirms the covenant between God and his people." This is the new promise, the new way. Like when Jesus offered the woman a new way of love, forgiveness, being broken by God's goodness. But not just by God's goodness, but what it cost God to be good to me. You see that? What God was willing to sacrifice to bless me, to be good to me. He says, and it is poured out now as a sacrifice for many. See this again? Broken and poured. Broke the bread, poured the wine. Broken and poured out. Now, Luke records one extra detail. About Mark and Luke, and Luke got all of his information from Peter, who was there. So he's writing that down. And he records one extra detail. And it says in Luke 22:19, and Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it. And he gave it to them, saying, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Do this in remembrance of me. Now, most scholars are thinking about every time that you celebrate the new covenant of the Passover, especially for us today, as that's become our tradition of the Lord's Supper and the communion service that we celebrate here and churches around the world. It's the common type of observance that's held all over the world. Do this, and whenever you do this in remembrance of me. It represents my body. It represents my blood. It always has. It always will. Do this in remembrance of me. Now, all those scholars agree with that, but there's another additional lesson that many scholars also pulled out of this passage, that it's not just the do this of the bread and the wine. It's not just the do this of the bread and the wine. But when you do this of the bread and the wine, there's another that to remember too. Not just this, but the that. What's the that in here? He says, this is my body given for you. Do this, it means also do that. My body which is broken for you. Do this body breaking too. Do this soul crushing, life altering remembrance, just like the woman who was broken. The only reason her jar was broken is because she was broken. There'd be no use in breaking the jar and giving the perfume as a sacrifice without a life that was so much more of a sacrifice than the jar would have ever been. She was broken. She was changed. She saw herself. She looked in the eyes of perfection and she saw that she wasn't that. As we look in the eyes of Jesus and we get close to him, we'll see to ourselves like, that's not who I am. That's a holiness. That's God. That's other than me. But it's an other than me that draws me and gets me next to him, and he promotes me and draws me to himself, and I am his. I am his. I've been picked. I've been picked by the perfect one. It means to live broken, like the Apostle Paul, who said, writing at the end of his life, after being tortured and jailed for the gospel time and time again. You see, the Apostle Paul, when he did this, he also did that, didn't he? Tortured and jailed many times for the gospel. The Apostle Paul, he's prayed some dangerous prayers. Was he willing to pray some dangerous prayers for that? Like, if it's about me, God, then I don't even pray that much. God bless me, keep me safe. God, take care of my family. Good prayers, right? Good prayers. But beginner prayers. So he says, the Apostle Paul says, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering in the sacrifice and service of my faith. God will break you. God will break you. And this idea of brokenness is understood by Christians throughout all the years, will always be an important part of Christianity. In fact, this message, in this series of messages, these dangerous prayers, these three prayers, search me, break me, send me, these prayers have been preached around in many churches. And when I found this set of messages, I also found a little video that's like, I thought, this is great, this idea of dangerous prayers. It's great. And I also found a little video by Pastor Craig Groeschel. When he preached this, he told a story of his personal brokenness that is so powerful. I want you to see it. And then Jennifer has a song for us.
To the cross I look, to the cross I cling, all the suffering I do drink, all this work I do sing, for only my Savior, both bruised and crushed. Surely God is love, and God is just. At the cross, you reckon me, you draw me gently to my knees, and I am lost for words, so lost in love. I'm sweetly broken, wholly surrendered. What a lost in love, sweetly broken, holy surrender. And all the cross I must confess. How wondrous your redeeming love, and how great is your faithfulness. At the cross you beckon me, draw me gently to my knees, and I am lost for soul, lost in love, sweetly broken, holy surrender. At the cross you beckon me, draw me gently to my knees, and I am lost for soul, lost in love, sweetly broken, holy surrender.
We impress people with our strengths, but we connect people through our weakness. We may impress people sometimes. You may be impressed by what somebody can do, but we connect most deeply through our brokenness. It's when I look at someone and I think, it doesn't matter what you're doing, I just love you. Not for how good you are, but for you. Dr. Henry Cloud, the author of all the books on boundaries, fantastic material. He said this, he said, I don't have any reason, I don't have any way to really prove it. He said, but God could have put our tear ducts anywhere. He could have put them, back here, back there, your tears are for your eyes, but why are your tears there for other things? He could have put the way your body responds to breaking anywhere, right? But he put them in our eyes so that at the moment that we feel the most broken and our eyes kind of show that we can't keep it together, we have liquid brokenness, that you can look in someone else's eyes and they can feel the love back into your eyes. And then their liquid brokenness responds to your liquid brokenness. And you're liquidly broken, sweetly broken. Together, we connect most through our brokenness. Life's greatest breakings often lead to God's greatest blessings. Because you're not alone, and then you can grow, and then you get Jesus, and on the other side of the breaking is an intimacy, is a change, is a transformation. You become a different person. There's that brokenness that's there, that connection that's there, and you and I, we long for that connection more than we could ever say, we could ever know. We build walls around ourselves to not do it, for people not to know. We have all these reasons for it, but it's just not real. God put those liquid broken drippers right there so you can't hide it. Think about the Apostle Peter. He betrayed Jesus. He said, Jesus, I'll never betray you, so strong. But in the night, Jesus was beaten beyond recognition. He even denied, he didn't stand up for Jesus. Like sometimes we don't stand up. And then he was chosen after he was broken to be the guest preacher on the day of Pentecost. He went from betrayer of Jesus 50 days later Pentecost. Preaching and 3,000 are saved in one day. The message wasn't prepared the night before Pentecost. The message was prepared the night Jesus Christ was beaten, when he saw himself unable to do even a word on behalf of Jesus. And he saw that nobody, especially him, can do anything without the leading of the Holy Spirit. He's got to be broken. Those who God uses the greatest are often those who have been broken the deepest. Those who God uses the greatest. And so in your breaking, in your issues in your life, those aren't the things to avoid. Those are the things to turn toward and say, come on, I'm going that way. I'm going through that valley of the shadow of death. But God, be with me, and I'm going to fear no evil, because in that valley of the shadow of death, there's no problem but only the fear of evil, God. So I'm going into it, God, and I'm going to have courage even though I'm afraid, God. I'm going into it. I'm not going to avoid that valley anymore, God. I'm going into it, God, because I know, God, my destiny is on the other side of that thing, God. And I may have mountains and I may have valleys, God, but my destiny is always to go into it, into the brokenness, because I know, God, that's where my strength comes from. That's where my power comes from, especially God's power. And some here say, you may never pray this prayer, and that's okay. You may refuse to pray the prayer, God, break me. That's okay. But some of you here today, you might be able to preach it better than me because you're living it. You're in it right now. And the truth is, there's some areas I'm in it too. Just things aren't cooked totally yet in some areas. But what about you? You may say, this is an anchor message for me. I could preach this one. Let me at it. But you also may be tempted to fight right now, to keep it together. I got to keep it together. Nobody can see. I got to keep it together. I got to keep it together. And I tell you this, if you're in that spot and say, I got to keep it together, I'd say this, don't do it. Don't keep it together. Don't keep it together. Say, God, let it break, God. Let it break, God. Let it break. Because I'm not the person standing back. I'm the one that's breaking everything and pouring it on the head of my Savior and my Lord and saying, Jesus, if it takes everything, if I lose my reputation, it's okay, God. God, if I can never go back to this, God, it's okay, God. I don't care who knows. I don't care who sees. When you're really broken, you don't care who knows. You don't care who sees. In brokenness, you got a choice to run from God or run to God. And I've done both. In brokenness, I either run from God or run to God. And this is not advanced Christianity. This is not for monks and nuns and people with, the whipped up hair that know how to quote the King James. This is not for that. And the truth is, this is basic Christianity, known and understood by godly people for all time, and will always be what is known to be real and basic Christianity. Safe Christianity really is not Christianity at all. The gospel in truth is an invitation to come and die. Come and break. The sinful woman poured all out. She was transformed because she poured it all out. That's our mission in our church, just to see lives transformed into the likeness of Jesus Christ. She was transformed, but here's the problem. She poured it all out. Here's the problem with us, is that many of us have not ever poured it all out. There might be someone here today who says, I'm that person, I've never poured it all out. I've visited the home of Simon the leper, but I've always stood to the back. I've never poured it all out, God. And if you never pour it all out, you'll never be broken. And if you're never broken, you'll never be transformed, and you'll always go back to the way you were before. brokenness is God's miracle design to never go back. Because you can't go back. You don't have the perfume anymore. You poured it all out. And so today, pray, God, I don't want to be partially poured out. I don't want to be just cracked, God. Break me and use me, God. Break me and use me, God. Break me and use me, God. Break me and use me. I want to be fully devoted to you, so break me and use me. I want to be transformed, so break me and use me, God. Break me and use me. What's your version of this dangerous prayer? Maybe it's just too much. It's overwhelming right now. But maybe you can say, God, pick out one thing. Just pick out one thing, God, and say, God, I'm willing for you to break me in this area. It's probably an area you're already cracked. Say, God, break me in this area. Would you pray with me right now? If you have an area of your life that you're saying, that you're willing to say right now, dear God, break me in this area. Every eye's closed, every head's bowed, but really, we should be able to do it with everybody staring at each other, because when you're really willing to be broken, you don't care what people think. Would you willing to say right now, God, in this one area of my life, at least this one, and name what it is. Say, God, break me in this area. Anybody lift up your hand? God, break me. Anybody lift up your hand today with me? God, break me in this one area of my life. Anybody else? I see those hands. Anybody else? God, break me in this one area of my life. Anybody else? God, break me in this one area of my life. Break me in this area of my life. Break me in this area of my life. Amen.